Hello, everybody. My name is Michael, and welcome back to Last to First. Kicking off part 2 of my way too early 2024 predictions. Today is all about the drivers. So let's get into it with P20. I'm going with Logan Sargeant. He was clearly the worst performer of 2023, and I don't think much will change this year. The pressure will be even higher on him this time around, and I think Albon is going to crush him again. I don't think the Williams will really be any better than last year, so I can't imagine Sargeant being really any better either, as sad as it is. Even though he will have now the year of experience under his belt, I don't think that experience is going to make up for what he was lacking last year, and I think there's almost a 0% chance that he will still have the drive in 2025. I don't think he had any business having it in 2024, but here he is with another drive, and yeah, I hope he does perform better for Williams' sake, but I think he won't, and I think Albon will crush him again. For P19, I'm going with Kevin Magnussen. I think Haas will be by far the worst car on the grid, and I don't think it'll necessarily be a terrible season for Magnussen, but I think there's really only so much you can do when you do have the worst car on the grid, and I think unfortunately he will be in that worst car of the grid. So I think there may be some pretty good qualifying performances again, as per usual with the Haas, but I think it's going to be very difficult for them. I think they're probably going to start slipping down into what Williams used to be, where they were really at the back without, fighting for much of anything, at least during the race. Hopefully that's not the case for the competitiveness of the entire field, but I do think Haas will be the worst team on the grid. And I think because of that, Magnussen will be in P19. Continuing on with that, in P18, I'm going with Nico Hülkenberg. Once again, I think, with Haas being the worst car on the grid, it's going to be tough for them to do anything. But I think Nico Hülkenberg will perform better than Magnussen again. I think he did last year, even though he had been out of Formula One for some time. And I think now that he's a bit more comfortable and he's had that full season under his belt without as much time off, I think Hulk will put on some really good quality performances and really handedly beat Magnussen this year. I don't think it's going to be too close. But I hope that Haas can provide a better car for the two of them so that they can at least score some points, but I don't think that'll be the case. P17, I'm going with Zhou Guanyu. I think he will have an okay season this year again, but I think the Sauber is not going to be super competitive again this year, so I think it's going to be tough. I think he had a more impressive 22 season than 23, maybe just because I don't think anyone expected him to be anything special, but I think he did perform really well, and he personally really surprised me. I was surprised by his speed and everything in 22, and I still think he didn't have a bad 23 by any means. But nonetheless, he still outqualified Bottas pretty frequently and had a quiet but decent 2023 season. With the Sauber, I don't think it's going to be so competitive again. And I think Bottas is going to have something to prove this year to get another contract in F1 if he really wants to keep going. So I think it's going to be tough for Zhou to beat Bottas this year. But I still think he'll have a quietly decent 24 season again as well. P16, I'm going to go with Zhou's teammate, Valtteri Bottas. I think he'll be a bit less laid back this year. I think he's going to have to be if he wants to retain a seat in Formula One. He really needs to get a bit more competitive in order to get that Audi drive. And, if he just continues to kind of be chill and laid back and not have such good performances, then I don't think they're going to renew his contract. His career is really following suit to Raikkonen almost to a T. It's kind of funny, at least the end of it. Obviously, Bottas isn't a champion. But he's really just kind of taking it easy and looks like he's at least enjoying himself. But in terms of being competitive in Formula One, he needs to take it up a notch if he wants to hold a seat for 25 and beyond. Up in P15, I'm going with Alex Albon. a long ways off from his teammate in P20, Logan Sargent. But once again, I think Albon's going to have a great season and is going to trounce all over Logan Sargent. It'll be tough for him to beat his 2023 season since he did have such a strong season, but I think he will have another great one and will significantly outperform his car as well as his teammate. He did have a few mistakes creep in last year, such as Australia, and I think he'll really be able to iron those out this year and be even more consistent. I don't think the Williams will be as competitive, but I think Albon will still put the car in places that it doesn't belong. I think it's going to be really tough for Williams to hold on to Albon, not only because I'm sure Albon wants to get into a more competitive car, but I think other teams are really going to start eyeing him up a bit more after having another strong season in Formula One. So I could see him moving on to a bigger team in 2025 and beyond. I kind of hope so. I'd like to see him in another team after this resurgence from his poor time at Red Bull, but we'll see. It's going to be a fun 2025 driver season. Either way, I think it's going to be a strong season for Albon at P15. For P14, I'm going with Esteban Ocon. I think the Alpine duo are really a difficult ones to guess. I feel like Ocon and Gasly are pretty much the same driver. They have similar stats, I think similar performance ceilings, and they always seem to perform opposite to each other. When one does well, the other seems to struggle. I think Gasly started to get a better feel for the car and the team towards the end of last year, so I think he'll outperform Ocon even though Alpine is supposed to be Ocon's team. But yeah, I think for some reason Ocon is just not going to have the best season, maybe just off of vibes. But I think that Gasly is going to do better than him. In P13, I'm going with Yuki Tsunoda. I think the AlphaTauri is going to be a lot more competitive this year, but I still don't think Yuki is going to make that step to be a high-level driver. I don't think he quite ever will. I've never understood the hype behind him. I think he still makes mistakes, most notably Mexico 2023, and I think that's going to continue to creep in, and I think it's going to cost Yuki and AlphaTauri this year. But he did have overall a strong season last year, probably his strongest one to date, even with those mistakes. But I think Ricciardo is still going to pull something out of the bag and perform a bit better than Yuki this year. For P12, I'm going with Lance Stroll. I'm not sure there's much to say about Stroll that hasn't been said already. I think he's an okay driver, but he's certainly not great and he's not consistent. I think Alonso will easily beat him again this year, and Stroll's poor performances and mistakes are really going to cost Aston in the constructors again. If he had been performing better throughout the year last year, then I don't think McLaren would have had a sniff at fourth in the constructors championship, even with their resurgence. But alas, Stroll scored very few points in comparison to Alonso, and I think that's really going to hurt him in the championship as well as Aston in the Constructors' Championship. For P11, I'm going with Pierre Gasly. Even though I think the Aston will be a much better car than the Alpine, I think Stroll's struggles will allow Gasly to beat him in the championship. Now that Gasly has a year under his belt at Alpine and will feel a lot more comfortable and confident that he can push the team, he'll be able to push them in the direction that he wants. I think that's going to allow him to surpass Stroll in the championship. It's probably going to be very close, and I don't have too much faith in Alpine making a good car, but I do have faith in Stroll having a poor year and Gasly having a pretty decent year. So I think he will be just outside of the top 10 in P11, but I think for what he's given, I think Gasly will have a pretty decent year. For P10, I'm going with Daniel Ricciardo. His half year in 2023 didn't exactly go according to plan with his injury, but it was still a decent showing, especially with his high peak at Mexico. But you can argue that he maybe shouldn't even had any chance at all in 2023. That was the plan, for him to completely sit out a year. So for him to get any time in the car in that year was probably a pretty good thing for him. Allowed him to get his feet wet in the AlphaTauri and really prepare for 24. So this season is really going to be where they want to look at him to be a potential contender for the Red Bull seed, and now is when he really needs to turn up the burners and really beat Yuki Tsunoda and show that Ricciardo still has something in him to get some good performances. I think, if Ricciardo can finally have a stretch of races where he can get a good feel for the car and get comfortable, then I think he's going to get to a higher level, probably almost certainly not quite as high of a level as he was in his Red Bull days, but I think he is going to get to a higher level than what he was at McLaren, and I think he'll be able to beat Yuki this year. For P9, I'm going with Fernando Alonso. Alonso had obviously a really stellar 2023 season. However, I think the car is going to be about as competitive as it was at the end of last year. I think they are going to continue to get outdeveloped again by the big teams ahead, and I don't think they're quite ready to fight for titles and wins. I don't think Alonso will show or will slow down at all. I think he's going to continue to defy the odds and continue to be an absolute beast and pull out some great performances and dominate his teammate again. But I don't think he'll have the car under his belt again, unfortunately. And I don't think that elusive next win is going to happen. But boy, would it be fun to see another Alonso win. Either way, I think he's going to have another incredible season. He'll push the car to the absolute limits. And, wherever he's winding up, that's the most that the car could get. But unfortunately, I think that's only going to get him to P9 in the championship. Now for P8, this might be a bit of a surprise, and it feels tough to say the next couple drivers here, but if you saw my constructors' predictions, then you'd understand why. That for P8, I'm going with George Russell. His 2023 season was honestly quite disappointing. He had some major mistakes, like his one in Singapore. He had a lot of issues and mistakes that a top driver really shouldn't be making. But we can certainly say the same thing about Leclerc. Leclerc had far too many mistakes last year, and I think he's still generally pretty mistake prone. But it's tough. I think Russell and obviously Hamilton too both expected the 22 car to be competitive. I mean, Mercedes went from dominating all that time, so I think Russell was prepared to be fighting for wins and championships, and then that didn't happen in 22. I think he kind of reset for 23, and for it to again not be a car that's able to fight for the wins or the championship, I think that's just making him kind of push too hard and try too hard to make something happen that isn't there. I think this coming year, though, will be better. I think he recognizes his lack of consistency and the mistakes he was making. So I think he's going to be a bit more consistent this year and work on those mistakes. But I think Hamilton's still going to get the better of him. Speaking of Hamilton, for P7, I have to go with Lewis Hamilton. I think, unfortunately for him, I think he'll have to deal with another uncompetitive car. And even worse, I honestly think that 2021 will be the last time that he fights for a championship. He's one of the best of all time, so I still see him performing well and beating Russell. But I think the cars ahead of him will be more competitive, and there will only be so much more that he can do. I'm not so sure that Mercedes will be able to turn things around in this ground effect era. And Hamilton only has so much time left. I'm not sure, he doesn't show any signs of slowing like Alonso, but, he might want to call it quits at some point in the near future. But I certainly hope that Mercedes can give him a competitive car because he will certainly be there to fight for a championship if he is given one. P6, I'm going with Carlos Sainz. I think the Ferrari is going to be a much more competitive car this year, and I think it's going to be a similar case as 2022 regarding the drivers. Generally, it seems that Sainz can get the most out of the car when it's underperforming, but when the car is at its best, Leclerc really shines and has a significant margin over Sainz. I think Sainz will end up signing a new contract. I'm not sure if it will be for the 2+ years that he wants. It might just be for a year, but I don't know. For some reason, I think he's going to struggle this year. I think Leclerc is really going to hand it to him. And, if the car is as competitive as I think that it's going to be, then I think, Sainz is going to struggle a bit and not quite be at Leclerc's level. P5, I'm going with Oscar Piastri. I think the McLaren is going to be a very good car this year, so that's certainly going to aid his ability to get up in the championship. But I think he's also going to improve and get faster. We saw just in his rookie year how much trouble he was able to give Lando, which Lando had not seen, that competitive of a teammate in quite some time. But overall, I still think Lando will have the edge over him. Both of them are fantastic, but Lando might be in the prime of his career right now, and he's ready to take advantage of anything that comes his way. So he's going to be hungry to fight for wins and potential championships, and I don't think he's going to let Piastri get in the way. I think Piastri still has some improvements to be made, particularly in his race pace regarding tire usage. But he's a quick learner and obviously a very very good driver. So I think he will learn quick, and it's going to be a lot closer this year. I think, if the car is as competitive as I think it's going to be, then I think Lando will really be the one to take full advantage of it. And that's why I think Piastri is going to be in fifth as compared to where you'll see where I put Lando Norris. For P4 in the championship, I'm going with Sergio Perez. While I think Red Bull will still be a force to be reckoned with, Perez barely got second place in the most dominant car of all time. So if he can't get, if he can barely get second in the best car of all time, I think this year is going to be another difficult one for him. With it being as close that I think it's going to be between all the teams, I think Perez is really going to fall down the order. I could easily see him being lower, maybe fifth or sixth, but I think fourth is probably more likely. That'd be quite the tough season for him if he does finish lower. But I mean, if he couldn't get a grip on last year's car, how is he going to get a grip on this year's car? The RB20 is just the evolution of the RB19. And I think he's just going to continue to struggle with it. And with the field being even closer than it was last year, I think that's going to cause him to fumble down the order. And yeah, if there is a fight for the constructor's title or for the driver's title, and Perez is nowhere to be found, that's A, going to be tough on Verstappen, and B, I could see Perez finally losing his seat if he's not there to really help pick up the pieces and really help in the championship battle. So we'll see. I think almost certainly Perez will lose his seat next year, probably at the end of the season. I'm not sure about mid-season unless he's having a really poor season. But yeah, I don't envision him being there beyond 2024. So I think it will be another tough season for Perez. P3, I'm going with Lando Norris. I think Norris's time is coming, and with the uptick in form in McLaren, I think Lando will take full advantage of it, and I think he finally might get his first win in F1. I think it will be one of, if not his best seasons in F1, and I think he'll be performing at a really high level. I think he's got something to prove, and he is ready to go. As long as McLaren can give him a car, then I think he's ready for it. He can smell wins and a potential championship fight, and yeah, I think he's ready for it. Would love to see him get his first win in 2024. However, he did certainly show some cracks in 2023 because of Piastri. I mean, he was almost bulletproof against Ricciardo, but that's because Ricciardo was nowhere to be found and was not putting any pressure on Norris. But as soon as Piastri came in and started pressurizing him and qualifying, particularly, mistakes were being shown. So I would like to see Lando make some improvements in that area, and I think he will. But it was interesting to see some of that pressure get to him last year, I think. But either way, I think it's going to be a really incredible season from Norris. Now for P2 in the championship, I'm going with Charles Leclerc. I think the 24 season is going to play out similarly to 22, just kind of reversed. I think Red Bull is going to start off the year very strong, like they ended in 2023, because they still have that advantage. But I think Ferrari will start to close the gap as the season goes on. Red Bull has kind of mentioned those diminishing returns as the development goes on. So I think as they start to see some type of ceiling or at least getting less gains, I think Ferrari are kind of just now at the precipice of their concept and being able to make some gains. So I think they'll start proportionally making bigger gains than Red Bull and start to catch them throughout the year. And if Ferrari can provide a decent a decent car for Leclerc, he is certainly more than capable to get the most out of it. I think he's obviously one of the fastest drivers in F1, and I think he could fight for a title, but I do think he is still a bit too accident prone. I think he makes a bit too many mistakes, and he really needs to calm those down. There's certainly arguments about him, pushing too hard, and that's why he's making the mistakes, and, it kind of comes with being the fastest driver and making mistakes, but I don't really buy into that. I think their mistakes are mistakes, and they shouldn't be happening. Verstappen is clearly one of the fastest, and he doesn't make nearly a single mistake all season. So Leclerc needs to really hone in on those mistakes. But I'm really hoping to see some more battles between Leclerc and Verstappen and maybe even Norris this year. I mean, 2022, when the season was still alive, was really fun to watch with some of those battles. So I would love to be able to see those again. Now for P1, you have to go with Max Verstappen. I think the bet against Verstappen this year is pure insanity, and I think it'll be a four-peat for him. I think he's going to comfortably win the title again because of his ruthless consistency, but I do think it will be much closer this year just overall, especially because Perez will be nowhere to help Verstappen in the constructors or just to pick up wins. The Red Bull has always been geared towards the race rather than qualifying in these set of rules, and I think that will be the case again this year. However, I think it's going to negatively impact them a bit more because last year, if Verstappen didn't qualify on first, if he qualified second, third, fourth, or something like that, he would very much have the pace to be able to just breeze past everybody in the race, and it wouldn't be too much of an issue. But if next year is going to be close and close as I think it is, especially in qualifying, if Verstappen ends up qualifying in fourth, fifth, sixth, and the race pace is closer, it's going to be really tough for him to make up those positions again. So if it is closer this year, it will be interesting to see how Red Bull kind of not necessarily develops the car, but builds setups around to see if they gear it a little more towards qualifying so that they can at least have the grid position. But we'll see. I still think Verstappen is going to be in another league of his own. I don't see him slowing down at all, and I think the Verstappen dominance is going to continue at least through 2025, and maybe it'll stop in 2026 if Red Bull kind of fumbles the bag or if another team does better. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to stop Verstappen except for retirement. So we'll see. But I hope for a much closer year this year. Even if Verstappen and Red Bull do end up winning again, just hope to see some more battles, some more different winners and everything like that. I just want some good racing. So we'll see what happens. Lastly, I wanted to give one bold prediction for the season regarding the drivers. And my bold prediction is that Ricciardo will drive at least one race for Red Bull in place of Perez. Whether, I don't know what for, but maybe it's just to test out Ricciardo to see how he is. But I think at some point, Ricciardo will be in that Red Bull for one race. And, maybe it's just a test in a race to see, how he performs. But I think Perez may not perform so well, and I could see Ricciardo being in that car for at least one race. So let me know what you guys think of all of my predictions. What are your bold predictions for the year, and who do you think is going to take the championship? Let me know. Follow me on social media platforms. I'm on X/Twitter as Last the First Reel, as well as on Instagram as Last the First. So follow me on there and let me know what you guys think. Until next time, have a good one.